In the thick jungles of Vietnam during the 1960s and early 1970s, a concealed and deadly threat waited silently to strike unaware soldiers. In the middle of the violence and disorder of the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army relied on a frightening range of booby traps created to wound, terrorize, and kill anyone who entered areas under their control. But what exactly were these lethal contraptions, and how did they become such a defining element of a war that still lingers in the memories of so many? From the notorious punji stake pits to the deadly bamboo whip traps, these cleverly cruel devices took thousands of lives and left many more bearing deep physical and psychological scars. As the military thinker Sun Tzu once wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." The traps used in Vietnam embodied this idea, spreading fear and uncertainty among troops and forcing them to face an opponent who was both unseen and deadly. Join us as we step into the hazardous battlefields of the Vietnam War and uncover the dark world of booby traps that filled soldiers with dread. Welcome to the Historian Guru, a look into the Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics. A closer look at Viet Cong guerrilla warfare. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong, a communist guerrilla force battling US and South Vietnamese troops, became famous for their clever and highly effective methods of fighting. Because of this, the phrase Viet Cong guerrilla tactics is often used to describe the creative techniques they used to outmaneuver their opponents in Vietnam's jungles and rice fields. From the late 1950s through the 1960s, the Viet Cong built a sophisticated strategy to counter the superior weapons and resources of US and South Vietnamese forces. Their success depended largely on their ability to blend into local communities and use the natural landscape to their advantage. They also recognized that surprise was their most powerful weapon and made it central to their battle plans. A major feature of Viet Cong strategy was the construction of an extensive system of underground tunnels, such as the Siu Chi tunnels near Ho Chi Minh City. Often built beneath villages, these tunnels allowed fighters to travel unnoticed and avoid enemy patrols. They also functioned as living areas, storage facilities, and even hospitals for guerrilla fighters. Today, the Siu Chi tunnels attract tourists, serving as a reminder of the Viet Cong's ingenuity and persistence. However, the tactic most closely associated with the Viet Cong was their use of traps. These devices, designed to injure, kill, or weaken enemy morale, often relied on simple materials. Punji sticks, for instance, were sharpened bamboo stakes hidden in the ground and frequently coated with harmful substances to increase the chance of infection. These vicious traps terrified enemy troops and proved highly effective, causing numerous injuries and slowing military movement. One prominent historical figure linked to Viet Cong guerrilla warfare is General Vo Nguyen Giap, the strategist behind many of their victories. His well-known statement, "We will fight the enemy with our cunning and make them die in their anger," reflects the Viet Cong's resolve to use intelligence and resourcefulness to overcome stronger forces. Beyond punji sticks, the Viet Cong used many other inventive techniques to harm their enemies. Booby traps such as bouncing Betty, mines, and altered hand grenades were set to surprise soldiers and inflict severe injuries. Net traps and falling traps also captured enemy troops, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The psychological side of Viet Cong tactics was just as important. They aimed to frighten their enemies by incorporating poisonous creatures like snakes and scorpions into traps and even contaminating food and water supplies. The objective was to keep soldiers constantly uneasy, damage their morale, and ultimately weaken their desire to continue fighting. Exploring the Siu Chi tunnel network. The Siu Chi tunnels, an enormous underground network stretching more than 250 kilometers, were vital to Viet Cong guerrilla operations during the Vietnam War. Built between the late 1940s and the 1960s, these tunnels extended from the outskirts of Saigon to the Cambodian border. They served as hidden bases from which the Viet Cong could launch surprise assaults, transport supplies, and avoid capture. Life inside the Siu Chi tunnels was extremely difficult. Fighters dealt with cramped conditions, poor airflow, and the ever-present risk of discovery. Despite this, the tunnels contained various facilities that allowed guerrillas to live and operate underground for long stretches. These included sleeping areas, meeting rooms, kitchens, and makeshift medical stations for treating the wounded. The tunnel system was cleverly engineered with multiple levels, secret entrances, and hidden exits meant to confuse and discourage enemy forces. Some openings were hidden beneath house floors or disguised as termite mounds, while others lay submerged under rivers or rice fields. Booby traps such as punji stake pits and explosive tripwires guarded the tunnels against intruders. American and South Vietnamese forces did not uncover the tunnels until the early 1960s. Once they understood their importance, major efforts were launched to locate and destroy them. This led to the creation of special units called tunnel rats, small, agile soldiers who volunteered to crawl into the dark, cramped tunnels to search for enemy fighters and disarm traps. One well-known tunnel rat, Sergeant Samuel Orozco, described his experience by saying, "You never knew what was waiting for you around the next bend. A tripwire, a snake, or maybe even a Viet Cong soldier." Their missions were terrifying and dangerous, but their courage helped counter the Viet Cong's underground advantage. Even with these efforts, the tunnels remained a serious problem for US and South Vietnamese forces. The Viet Cong's deep knowledge of the tunnels allowed them to launch ambushes and vanish without a trace, leaving opposing troops frustrated and demoralized as they struggled with this unfamiliar type of warfare. Notable events connected to the Siu Chi tunnels include the Battle of Siu Chi in 1966 and Operation Cedar Falls in 1967. During the Battle of Siu Chi, US forces attacked the tunnel complex, but the Viet Cong escaped and later regrouped. Operation Cedar Falls was a massive search and destroy mission aimed at clearing the Viet Cong from the Iron Triangle region, which included Siu Chi. Although much of the tunnel system was destroyed, the Viet Cong rebuilt and continued their guerrilla campaign. Bamboo's darker role, the punji stick trap. The Viet Cong's use of punji sticks during the Vietnam War shows how simple, locally available materials could become deadly weapons. These traps, made from sharpened bamboo stakes concealed in the ground, were intended to cause severe injuries and spread fear among enemy troops, highlighting the Viet Cong's creativity and cunning. Punji sticks were first used during the First Indochina War, when Vietnamese guerrillas employed similar methods against French colonial forces. However, during the Vietnam War, these traps became notorious as the Viet Cong improved their design and use to maximize damage. One well-known story comes from U.S. Marine Private First Class Frank Harbord, who stepped on a punji stick trap during a patrol in 1968. He later said, "I felt a sharp pain in my foot, and before I knew it, I was on the ground screaming in agony." Although his wound was not fatal, it removed him from combat and required weeks of recovery. The mental impact of punji stick traps was enormous. The constant fear of hidden dangers made soldiers anxious and distracted, lowering morale and increasing the chance of mistakes. US and South Vietnamese troops responded by developing reinforced footwear and sending scouts ahead to probe for traps. They also learned to avoid likely trap locations such as dense vegetation and suspicious clearings. Still, the Viet Cong adapted. They created more advanced punji traps, some with hinged or spring-loaded designs that could clamp onto a soldier's limb, causing even worse injuries. Landmines in the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong's deployment of landmines and booby traps revealed their deep understanding of psychological warfare, exploiting the fears and weaknesses of US and South Vietnamese troops. These lethal devices ranged from altered hand grenades to advanced mines such as the notorious Bouncing Betty, and their purpose went beyond inflicting physical injury. They were meant to break morale and interrupt military operations. The Bouncing Betty, formerly designated the S-mine, was especially terrifying. Originally developed in Germany during World War II, this mine would spring upward into the air once activated before exploding, causing catastrophic wounds to anyone nearby. The Viet Cong acquired such mines through multiple channels, including seized enemy supplies and covert deliveries from supportive nations. Beyond the Bouncing Betty, the Viet Cong relied on numerous other traps and mines, many crafted from whatever materials were available. These included toe poppers, small mines intended to cripple rather than kill, and tripwire explosives, which detonated when a hidden wire was accidentally disturbed. Some devices were cleverly disguised as ordinary objects like stones or plants, making them almost impossible to distinguish from the jungle's surroundings. One infamous trap was the grenade in a can. This deceptively simple but deadly setup placed a hand grenade inside an empty tin can, with its pin held in place by a rubber band. If a soldier stepped on or shifted the can, the band would snap off, pulling the pin and triggering an explosion. Because it was easy to hide and difficult to spot, this trap proved particularly treacherous. The extensive use of mines and booby traps inflicted significant casualties and severely damaged morale among US and South Vietnamese forces. Accounts of soldiers losing limbs or lives to unseen hazards spread anxiety throughout the ranks. Private Leonard Thompson described the mental strain. You never knew when it was going to happen. Every step could be your last, and that weighed heavily on your mind. To counter this threat, Allied forces introduced various defensive measures. Minesweepers and specialized detection tools were used to locate and neutralize explosives. Troops received training to identify typical trap locations, and aerial reconnaissance missions were conducted to map enemy minefields and guide troop movement. The art of entrapment, net and falling traps. The Viet Cong also demonstrated ingenuity through net traps and falling pit traps, both of which functioned as physical weapons and psychological terrors. Net traps, sometimes called man-catchers, were designed to snare soldiers and hoist them into the air, leaving them helpless. A large net, camouflaged with leaves, was spread over the ground and secured with stakes. When stepped on, a hidden rope mechanism would tighten the net and lift the victim off the ground. These were often paired with other hazards like tripwires or punji stakes. A well-known case occurred in 1966 during Operation Attleboro in Tay Ninh province. Falling traps were designed to send troops plunging into hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes. Often disguised as natural dips or lightly covered with foliage, these traps collapsed when stepped on. The infamous tiger trap, a deep pit lined with sharpened bamboo, was especially feared. Stakes were sometimes coated with poison or waste to increase infection risk and slow recovery. Lieutenant Tran Van Tuan of South Vietnam recalled seeing a comrade fall into one. The spikes pierced his legs, and it was impossible to pull him out without causing more damage. We had to call a medevac helicopter, and it took hours to extract him safely. Use of poisonous creatures and sabotage. The Viet Cong also turned to nature, using venomous animals and food or water poisoning as tools of psychological warfare. Snakes and scorpions were placed in hidden compartments, traps, or even sleeping areas.